Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Temeyer. I'm an architect and project manager with the Army Corps of Engineers Omaha District. Welcome to our fifth session of the USACE Sustainable Project Delivery Series. Today, we're going to be talking about sustainability in construction. So just a few ground rules before we kick things off. We'll try to keep the conversation going throughout the duration of the presentation. Nicole is willing to take questions throughout the duration of the presentation, but if you can, please put those questions in the chat box. I've included some hopefully short instructions in that box, and I'll try to do my best to insert them into the conversation today. We may have some time, may or may not have some time at the end of the presentation for more open discussion, and we're happy to facilitate that, assuming we have the time. So today we have Nicole Burman. She is, I'm going to read her bio here. She joined the Army Corps of Engineers in the summer of 2009 as an interior designer for Kansas City District, where she eventually received her LEED certification and became a registered interior designer. She has primarily worked on military design projects within the district, and that also includes several mega projects and a few international projects. Her current role is serving as the acting design branch technical services section chief, where she supports her district in AE acquisitions and the value engineering program. For many years, she utilized her LEED training as the district's sustainability manager, and she helped facilitate high-performance sustainable design within the district. That led to many projects with LEED silver and gold certifications. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Nicole here, and she can kick off the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. So welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about construction. And so really we want to continue to emphasize the importance of that integrated design and work that we've been talking about through this series of these webinars, and really understand how that designer of records incorporating the significant sustainable design features of the project, if that's not been constructed. So what we're talking about today, if that's not constructed in accordance to those plans and specification, then we're not guaranteed that high performance sustainable building. So as we walk through today, that moves us into our objective with the sustainability requirements and how they pertain to construction and our contracts. As we have shown on other items here, we have a resource page that has many links and important places that we can find additional information to further our knowledge on this topic. I will point out that we also have an MS Team site. Many of you may already be on there, but the link's also in there if you want to join that group for any further discussion or questions you may have. So today we'll discuss construction activities and documentation. So we're looking at UFC 1-200-02 for those construction activities, which as you see here include that commissioning, looking at that total building commissioning requirement. We've got the construction moisture control. We've got protection of that indoor air quality during construction and that waste management, and then of course the contract documents themselves. So to really kick off sustainability, our first thing I want to plug, I guess, before we dive into kickoff meetings is the importance of the UFTS specification 01-3329 sustainability reporting specification, and that this should be used on all of our projects. This spec really sets up the construction phase with those expectations and what needs to be included or tracked for that sustainability. And that also includes the requirement for the kickoff meeting. I've seen, a sustainability kickoff meeting be incorporated in the pre-construction conference portion or as a separate standalone meeting. But the point of this meeting really is to make sure we identify those sustainability design goals. So we should be reviewing that information, specific strategies that are being planned to be implemented to achieve those goals, discussing all of those elements, the unique construction methods that maybe need to be discussed for each project. So we're looking at providing that adequate time and attention to discuss those potential challenges, strategies, construction methods. We're looking for those shared experiences. So even understanding what maybe there were strategies or methods that were used on previous projects that have lessons learned with, good or bad. And then it's also possible to join this up together with the commissioning kickoff meeting too. So that could be, at the same time within that pre-construction conference or closely followed by a separate meeting. Okay, so then the next element here in the sustainability spec, we have the sustainability action plan. And this is really critical to make sure that the contractor is really understanding what the high-performance sustainable building is, and then also if this project is going after third-party requirements, really wanting to understand from start to finish that they get what the objective is here and how they're going to pursue that. So we're looking for a submission early on. So this is, winning that contract, preparing for that pre-construction conference, and a part of that preparation is that early submittal of the sustainability action plan. Now, if you've been around for a little bit, you're probably familiar with it being formally called as the lead implementation plan. And so these are one and the same, just now it's for all of our projects, right? We want to see what that looks like and how they're going to pursue it during construction. And so really we're looking at this as an element of the sustainability e-notebook, like it's a piece that goes in it, but ultimately it is a living construction plan. We want to see if it needs to evolve and change over time to accommodate things that maybe weren't considered in the beginning. We want to see that evolution. And this plan should be providing really specific information about how the contractor will be achieving each sustainability requirement of the contract. And so we want to see written down, and normally it's organized by the high performance sustainable building and or it could be a combination of these with the third party certification checklist. So maybe those credits are identified out, clearly laid out to how they're going to achieve each one of these pieces. And so this includes, the understanding of how they're purchasing products, so that, could be those low flow toilets, low emitting paints. Are they tracking all of these requirements? How are they working with on-site team subcontractors? Are they training in any particular way, or when are they discussing this with their subs? Pieces like that would be considered. And then it's important that we understand that this is a living document through construction, that it can be updated during, and identified during those progress meetings, and then even utilize for that monthly construction sustainability meeting. So we want that to be on our minds and thinking through that in all of the meetings that we have, identifying that piece with the action plan here. And when we get this submittal, we also want to make sure that the right people are reviewing it, right? So we want to have success by having a successful review and then utilizing it fully. But if we don't feel like we have expertise, I guess I'll just, put a plug out there to go find them, So go find your district sustainability manager or coordinator, other PDT members that have knowledge about this, and work through what are those facets for that design that we need to see for the construction in that plan. So then during construction, as we all know, there's that three-phase control process, and that can be incorporated into our sustainability, keeping that in mind while we go through this. So ensuring that we have specifications that are performing to those expectations, and then going into that preparatory, having the submittals reviewed. We're looking to make sure that we have a schedule, mock-ups, pieces like that would help in that discussion, but also during that preparatory bringing up the sustainability discussion that's appropriate for that specific feature of work, right? And making sure that, this meeting really should assure that the quality control and that training crew is considering a sustainability requirement, discussing how specifically those pieces interrelate with that feature work and what's important to keep in mind. So we'll talk about later the moisture, so making sure that some of the products that really shouldn't be near moisture, right, making sure that we're protecting those for that indoor air quality and so forth. It's also been brought up, too, that the RMS has checklists for these processes for the preparatory, initial, follow-up, and so forth, but they don't currently actually have line items for sustainability, but, we have an opportunity here to be proactive and to ask that to be included and work with that with our contractors as being kind of that standard practice. So next item for construction, we've got sustainable site work. Really, we'll, dive in here looking for, it's standard practice. It seems like a no-brainer probably at this point, something that we've done for a long time in making sure that our sites are sustainable and impacting the areas around our development correctly. And so we may not think of it as part of sustainability because we have the specification 015719, that's already establishing all this, but it is interrelated, and it, wanting to make sure that we understand that everything kind of works together. And here we've got that National Pollution Discharge Elimination System that's been established that we want to make sure that we're complying with. In addition to, there may be differences in state or local areas that have to be conformed to. We all know our local areas there that would be a part of this, but this is a part of that element in consideration for sustainability and walking through that during the construction phase. Okay. So we'll go through the slides here that we'll see what we have for our high-performance sustainable buildings and our typical construction practices that are interrelated. And then we'll see some just really touching to show how it interrelates maybe in a third party. So these ones specifically would be third-party certification for LEED, but they are interrelated in how they meet together and approach that sustainability goal. So here the LEED credit is that construction activity pollution prevention, and so that's interrelated here. We're not really going to go through details of that, but just wanted to bring that up as we move through and what those credits are that would be construction related. All right. So we're going to go into commissioning, which is another construction element that really is a really big topic. And so for this purpose of this discussion, we will talk through commissioning at a high level. So definitely, if you have any additional, details, lessons learned, questions, and anything that you're curious about, we've got an ER which will be displayed in a next upcoming slide that we can look at, or talking to your, commissioning experts, or even letting us know if you have any additional questions that will be there. But we're really focusing on that high level of how that relates here today. And so I do want to, really emphasize that, and we've talked about this before if you've been on one of our other webinars, but we're emphasizing that the commissioning is really not just a construction activity. It really should be starting early in the design phase, confirming those commissioning requirements. And so really we've seen how commissioning activities have started early and earlier in construction. I'm sure many of you have seen that to just meet these requirements. And so it's a good time to plug making sure that those are incorporated in those project construction schedules. We used to see just a chunk at the end in red zone. We've got commissioning happening. Really, we should be seeing a spattering of that throughout those schedules. And really, the commissioning part is something that the government has been doing and implementing for decades. It's just really evolved over time. And so as the buildings have been constructed and they're using less and less energy, often some of these solutions require those low energy buildings that become more complex with controls and schemes and equipment. And so these complexities in the system have brought that significance to commissioning. It really is a value that can ensure that the designs, construction, the installation, the balancing all meet those owners' requirements, those end expectations. So ultimately, commissioning, we are focused on enhancing that development of that project and through that verification and documentation of that implementation. The planning, design, and all of those, the testing, the operation, and maintenance phases are all covered through this process. So commissioning is identified in the UFC 1-200-02. It also is stated in that to follow the International Green Council Code, so formerly the ASHRAE 189.1. So we're looking at following that requirements, which are also defined in, there's that ER reference I was talking about. So in the ER and detailed out in our 0191 1510 total building commissioning spec. And so really here, when we talk about this specification, it, it's important to think about how, who does this, right? Who's working through this? And we'll get into a few more roles and responsibilities on the next slide. But overall, we want to remember that all team members are responsible here and have a part to play. We've got the commissioning spec, we've got HVAC specs, we've got the 07, 05, 23, building air barrier testing spec. All of those pieces come together to make up really vital pieces of commissioning and sustainability effort. So with everybody working or should be a part of this, right, it becomes the challenge of who really then owns it or takes that leadership. So that's something that needs to be answered on every project, identifying who that leader is going to be for that commissioning spec and organizing that commissioning effort. We want to make sure we keep that in mind. So here's the commissioning team. Really, I'm going to stay really high level here. The ER maps this out for everybody, and we're looking at the commissioning authority here at the top. So we want to really plan on understanding that the CXA is USACE always, right? And so we want to make sure we understand who that team member is, who's that lead, who's taking on those specs, Is that somebody on the PDT in-house? Is that somebody in the field that has expertise, that can be a part of that beginning of that project effort? And then we dive into those specialty team members. We've got the government, so the CXG. That would be if we're pursuing an AE to do the typical CXA effort, that would be that person, that expert government contracted third-party, person that's working with us. And then the design phase, so that's the design team members who understand commissioning, electrical, mechanical, architect, any of those individuals, and we have more than that, but just saying some of those examples there. And then, of course, the construction phase, the CXC. So that is from the contractor, the one who's doing that extra testing, who's pulling together all those contract requirements that we have for commissioning. But it's critical that these things are identified really early in the process. And so if we are looking for that AE, we need to have that AE on board before 35% to move this forward and getting and meeting those requirements. Additional, I'm so sorry, guys. I realized I didn't flip the slide. Additionally, there are the owner and then the designer of records, and then the construction contractor themselves, and then operation and maintenance staff. So this is the full team that we have here that you can see of who would be involved. Really, for most of it, will be involved all of these individuals as they come on board. All right, so when we talk about commissioning, a lot of times, traditionally it's been solely focused on that HVAC system. So that's our decades of experience, really, right? Looking at HVAC system, making sure that it's following what we're looking for here. Really, we're looking at that expanding, right? Our job now has really expanded. You can see a whole list of systems that could be integrated. The ER and the code here both have those typical systems that we would look for, but really the design needs to confirm what meets that scope of that project, right? What needs to be commissioned. So it could include everything that's on this slide. It could include additional items that wouldn't be typical in a project, but we find that on this particular project or with this particular customer, that it's really important that this get that third look, that integrative testing maybe to all the systems that are in the building. And so we want to make sure that that's identified early so we know what's in that ultimate scope there, and we're seeing and we're all on the same page, right? We know who needs to be on our commissioning team. We know what systems we're going to commission, and then change that specification to accommodate all of those. The spec doesn't include everything that could be possible. We want to make sure that it shows what that contract needs. Okay, so then there's additional, commissioning activities. We have the owner's project requirements that is defined as a commissioning piece, the activity that's there. But really, in a lot of projects, we actually define that as similar to or equal to really the Air Force PCRs, charrette reports, or even RFP documents, right? Those are defining what those requirements are for the contract. And then the basis of design, looking at really that being defined as a design analysis that we already have in our contract. So we have pieces that don't have to be duplicated or run the risk of having duplicated information that can be utilized as really good tools that are still meeting that intent and following through with what those commissioning activities are. So then also on this list, as we see, we've got the contract documents review, we've got commissioning plan, another document that needs to be planned out and followed through, a living document that will evolve as that contract, or potentially evolve as that contract moves forward. And then the review of the construction submittals, installation performance, training. Training is a really great asset here, working with that O&M team member, right, working through what that training needs to be. That's also a good plug for the specification, working with the customer and the owners and understanding what kind of training and to what level we're looking for and defining that in our specifications. And then, of course, we've got that commissioning report, the systems manual, and then the warranty. And the warranty period, that's one of the added facets we'll talk about here soon too in the elements of that total building commissioning part. And so there's a lot of a lot of gain that we get for the government in having somebody come back and confirm that the building's really doing what it's supposed to be doing with that commissioning hat on. So we also have a few lessons learned here, really looking, like I indicated, right, early. We're looking for that commissioning authority to be identified early. I've seen a lot of success in that, and I've also seen, projects where we're a little too late, and it became a challenge, right, to get all those pieces together. And I'm sure anybody working in the field would also say that challenge may be continued because we didn't have everything really vetted out the way that we should. And so we want to make sure that that's early. Looking to include that commissioning person during that review of design. It's really important to have that other set of eyes or somebody else looking at it with the idea of commissioning in mind, which is similar to sustainability in mind versus just detailing your details as a particular discipline. And then having adequate time for commissioning. So looking, again, that to be in that schedule and seeing how that all works together and making sure there's enough time to really do that action. And so since I've been talking a lot, I'll take this moment. There's that question there. Is there anybody who has any lessons learned that we can quickly kind of state about commissioning?
We usually have more questions at this point.
I know.
It's making us nervous.
Well, I will say that the ER that I've mentioned for commissioning does have a really good flow chart too. It really is a good tool to read through. You may need to read through it a few times. I know kind of taking in all of that information can be a little overwhelming if you haven't looked at it before, but there are good roles and responsibilities, flow charts, and information that's in there that you can really feed off of to get going if you haven't seen that before. So again, here we've got sustainability, third-party certification credits that are related here. Again, I'm just going to kind of show and touch on these. We've got that fundamental, that prerequisite requirement for LEED, and then we have that enhanced commissioning requirement here too that are interrelated, and that's what I want to move into, is really showing that interrelationship here, hopefully in a graphical way that would show us what we really mean. So the UFC up top here really is talking about what we just said, that early engagement in design processes, the additional scopes, looking at what are we doing in the envelope, is the life safety included, will emergency power be included, and looking at the post-construction insurance testing, so the value that we get from making sure it's doing what we asked it to do, right, over time. And really, that bar is encompassing both of those credits when it comes to LEED specifically. We've got a prerequisite credit that covers the standard documentation of commissioning. It covers those basic requirements, and then they consider it enhanced. And so we keep using these words enhanced maybe in our contract or scopes of work, but really what we want to focus in is that total building commissioning piece, and that total building includes both of these features. So our UFC is calling out the full level of what our commissioning should be at. And so we want to make sure that our scopes of work, the way that we communicate all of that, is focusing on that full breadth of knowledge and use, rather than maybe some of our old terms too when it comes to the third-party certification. But that's kind of how they interact here.
So Nicole, we have some questions rolling in. So okay. Annette Stump was asking if anybody has commissioning info for reclaimed water systems or gray water systems. I can't say that I do. I'm not sure if anybody else on the, or Nicole, if you do, or if anybody else on the line might. But it seems like somebody we could connect up with a resource if possible.
Yeah, I don't know anybody off the top of my head, but yeah, we have to write that down.
Martin Page at Annette, you can't answer your own question. It's a rule. So Martin Page at Searle probably knows. Second question is, does anybody have dedicated commissioning IDIQ contracts, performing commissioning in-house, or as options on the designer of records task order? I can actually tell you that we are negotiating a standalone, well, it's part of a construction phase AE services task order, but we have a project in Omaha that the stakeholders and USACE determined that they did not want to use total building commissioning spec as it's written. They wanted commissioning to occur separately by the designer of records. So we're negotiating a task order right now for that. I've seen various different iterations of that. We also have task order language for design side commissioning in our AE contracts. I don't know, Nicole, what you guys may have, but there's slightly different variations on that. I'm not aware of any standalone commissioning IDIQs. We just usually use our AE pools and then qualified commissioning expertise as part of those. But.
Yeah, actually Kansas City used to have a standalone commissioning IDIQ, and we went through that, and it worked for our needs, but we ended up including that as part of our scope of our current MATOCs that we have on board for our IDIQs. So we have that capacity and we utilize that. We do several separate AE task orders off of that for just commissioning, depending on what that project needs. And so that's how we handle that. And it looks like Seattle is saying that we have the prime cover that for third party. And so I think it's important to understand what those thresholds are and when we need that third party and how it's defined. I guess for me, when I look at scopes of work and reviewing some of that for our in-house stuff, I want to make sure that we say that they're separate entities that are identified. So even if maybe you have a large AE or even construction design build or something, that we're fully understanding that it is a separate team, totally separated from the design team if that was occurring. So we've had that happen too on some of our larger projects also. So you can kind of skin this cat a few different ways, but those are some of the options.
Right, and so what Seattle suggest, or what Mr. Wood is suggesting, in my understanding, is kind of the way that UFGS is written as a baseline, and that's good, and that met a need that was, I would say, pretty strong a few years ago, and that's certainly a viable path forward for a lot of projects. But it's not. I guess the caveat is that it's not always the correct solution for commissioning on every project, and so that's a decision that should be discussed with stakeholders. I see there's a comment here about the VA requiring standalone commissioning. That's very possible. It may vary depending on the size and scope of the project. I really don't know. sounds like John Anderson is saying they do. So, yeah, there's just a lot of different variations on this, and it can be, it should be worked through, as early as possible in the design phase, or even earlier, if there's a clear read from the stakeholder.
Yeah, I think the best success that I've seen is, we have a lot to do at the beginning of projects. I know PMs have a lot to do. We all have our challenges, but really adding commissioning and figuring out how we're going to approach it and what's appropriate, both meeting the thresholds of the ER, but also what's appropriate for that contract is really critical. Same with, when you're trying to figure out, are we going third-party certification? Does our project require that for sustainability? All of those things should be, we've got a project, we know how much it is, we've got a general scope, let's start solving this and looking at this and bringing that up. So at those kickoffs, at those charrettes, we need to be talking about that. Okay. So moving off of commissioning, I know that was a really big topic here. We're going to move into a few more of these construction elements that we've got here. So this one's the moisture control piece that's identified in our UFC. And so really we're looking here for that proper storage of the material that's on hand. And we're looking at making sure the absorptive materials are away from any place that they could be damaged, and that any materials showing evidence of, biological growth, we would not be installing those. So we're looking to avoid mold, right? We're looking for those pieces to not be put into our buildings. And so these requirements really shouldn't be a shocker, right? It seems a little bit like a no-brainer, so it should be standard practice. But we want to make sure we touch on this here. There are, again, that international green construction code there that's really bringing into light what are the specifics of what we're making sure so that we keep that in mind for the health of the people utilizing that building. And then, to really ensure that this happens appropriately, we're looking to make sure that we have those discussions, right, with the contractor, installing the material, appropriately. If we, don't see material being installed right, or it has that growth, we're not installing that all the way. And so approaching this information again in those monthly sustainability meetings, looking for the storage to be prepared, so in those preparatory meetings, figuring out what the plan is, looking at also when are these materials coming to site. Maybe it shouldn't be delivered too early, so then you don't have as much to protect, right? Or in a certain area shouldn't be moved there. So having those discussions and seeing how they're being implemented and that focus. And so you see here, in this picture is just an example of that absorbent material, so gypsum wallboard or MDF, et cetera, just being protected from damage and exposure to those contaminants, right? So all nicely wrapped up there. So I did just see this comment here before we go too far. So it says if we're hiring AEs to act as the CXG for the role. So we are hiring AEs to be that CXG role is the government commissioning AE. I guess make sure that that's clear. And so if we were doing it ourselves in-house, we would just be the CXA. You just wouldn't have a CXG on the project. But if you have an AE, they would be that CXG. It's the government commissioning person that we've hired, and how they found value. I have found great value in that, depending on what your skills are in-house, and of course, what type of project you're working on, and what the complexities are of that project. But when we have a larger project and we're not utilizing, sometimes we've utilized other districts too, and so that could be an option. But when we're using an AE, you know, there are people that have their full certification, there's team members, and you can have a full team pulled in. So if your project warrants that additional piece there, I think it's very valuable because that's what they specialize in, and they're very good at that commissioning element and understanding the detailing that goes into play, understanding how commissioning plan really should look, and then it maybe even is a good tool to have if you're trying to train up people in your district, to having that be a part of that scope and pulling other team members in-house onto that team and learning from the field in that.
This is Andy. I'd agree with that. Like, ultimately, it depends on the needs of the project, but it can be a useful tool to hire a firm that has either a more distinct capability set or can expand, you know, the capability set that the district already has.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so the next one we move into protecting that indoor air quality during construction. So here, again, we've got the International Green Construction Code calling for all of those air conveyance materials to be stored and covered so they remain clean. And then also requiring that all those filters and controls be in place and operating when the HVAC system, you know, is operating in the building for flush out or that baseline monitoring. So we have a few features here, two pieces that go to this. That one with the conveyance, making sure it's stored. We see that example actually in these images on the bottom showing how we're looking to make sure that everything is protected, and we want to make sure that it's protected during construction, and both when it's sitting down there and when it's also installed. And so it could be already installed but not capped off yet, and so we want to keep those protections there, keeping any contaminants out of that airstream system. But the second piece of this here is that flush out and then or the monitoring. And so I want to note that a lot of times we all have a lot of experience with that third-party certification, LEED in particular. We've got a credit, we got to look for it, we're going to go after that, or tell the contractor they have to do flush out. Now, that may not be required. Maybe we don't feel like that's entirely possible, or we don't require it. But we actually are required to do it per the UFC. So we want to make sure that we're still meeting these requirements in the UFC for that monitoring or that flush out. And that's time, right? We all know that it takes time, takes a lot of extra energy and effort into flushing out a building that would need to be in that schedule. And so it's not a third-party certification requirement. It's obviously an opportunity to achieve something there, but it is a requirement for the UFC. So when we look at that third party, again, we've got this example of a couple of them here that align with our UFC in the way of the air quality management plan, and then that indoor air quality management assessment. So another item is that waste and material management. We have the same green building code, and we're looking at diverting that non-hazardous construction demolition waste material generated from the disposal into landfills. And so we're looking at that to be, per our requirements in the UFC, 60% diversion. I believe the green building code actually calls for 50. I know that we used to call for 50, but it has been actually 60% diversion rate for a while. Though in anything that we do, we want to make sure that we always comply to the greatest extent possible and document that. So there may be some installations out there, there may be some circumstances or remote areas that just don't have these capabilities to meet this requirement in here. But the same with every part of our UFC, we want to meet it to the greatest extent possible and identify why that may not be possible if that is an issue for your area. Most places, though, I know that this has been happening successfully for a while, but just wanted to kind of indicate that there. And so this is just an example of what that could look like on a site, right? Looking for those critical pieces, making sure that solid waste management plan is there. That really ends up being submitted and approved through another specification, but is then brought into that sustainability e-notebook. And that's a plan that we want to make sure is conveyed to both in the instructions and how we're working through things, right, or preparatories, and how they're doing it during the installation action. How are they talking to their subcontractors about it and monitoring these pieces? Because it is work. We've seen that before, contractors making sure that everything is put in the right bin, working through, making sure we've got the tickets for those diversions and everything logged and put into that living notebook of information. So here in our specification 013329, so that sustainability reporting spec, it has a requirement for the contractor to have a sustainability professional. So we're looking for this to meet, of course, the level of your contract and what you're trying to achieve. And so if you're achieving that third party piece, really, and if that's lead, then we're looking for that person to be a lead AP. Now, I will say that if it's guiding principles or something like that we're working with other, like Air Force and so forth, it may still be a good thing to have that lead AP in there, or an equivalency of some type of certification that would be determined, because we want to really have somebody participating in this that has knowledge of the sustainability pieces, have confidence in their ability to coordinate, to raise any of those questions to us, right? We want somebody looking out for that on the contractor side during this whole process, and really participating in that project and responsible for all that coordination and that development, of course, ultimately, right? We're expecting them to develop all of those plans, construction documents, reporting information. Another thing that's come up, lessons learned, is really we want this individual, for the contractor, to be actively participating, including looking at those construction submittals before they come to the government, right? We want to know that what we're reviewing and looking at is already meeting those sustainability goals. It's been defined, right? We talked about at the very beginning, defined in that sustainability action plan. So currently, though, the 013329 spec does not explicitly say that in the contract. So we, even at my district, we're talking about adding that, right, to put some more clarity in there. So I would urge others to maybe add what you feel like is necessary to ensure that you can hold the contractor to having this individual look at that information with the sustainability hat on prior to being submitted for approval. Okay. So then construction sustainability documentation. So we know that the contractor needs to document. Obviously, we're expecting them to have photos and documentation and plans, indicating how they have met or are meeting all of these requirements, both for the UFC and for third party. But we also have an opportunity as quality assurance. We're taking photos when we're when we're able to, right, out on the field. So it's a good reminder to take those photos of how that site being protected, those materials being protected, the indoor air quality pieces are being incorporated, and then also, of course, keeping and seeing those waste diversion tracking pieces as part of even, you have information and products are coming out on site. So really seeing those at their monthly pay app, seeing information throughout the construction phase, looking at that e-notebook and seeing this documentation added every month. Those are all of the ways that we can track and ensure that there's been progress and moving along for our sustainability documentation meeting our specs. Okay, so we are getting close in time. We only have a few items left here, but really when we are looking at a contract, our goal is to get that contract constructed well and completed and closed out, right? And so we're wanting to see that sustainability being incorporated on the job site throughout all of those discussions, the review meetings, the monthly status reports, the active participation with that sustainability professional, the on-site inspections. All of these proactive steps really are facilitating an easier finishing step for us. And submitting those documents, in some situations, would be to third party, or in submitting those and having those reviewed by the government to ensure that they meet to the extent of the contract, right? All of this information and moving that through and having sustainability talked about throughout is what gets us to a smoother closeout. And, I feel like we've all been there. We've seen examples of success by staying on top of it, keeping that being a part of our language and our conversations and discussions. And then we've seen it where it hasn't, and we're wondering what happened at the end and how are we going to get this project closed out, right? And closeout lasts a little longer when that happens. And so it's to the benefit of everyone involved in the government to have this looked at and communicated and reviewed throughout construction, so that when we hit this red zone meeting and we start talking about where that final sustainability e-notebook is, we know that it's coming soon, and we've already seen most of it anyways, right? And then we're also looking at making sure that we're submitting for that third party. And so before we hit that submit button, or the contractor does, we want to make sure that that's looked at. We want to know that their sustainability professionals looked at it, and we want a government person to look over it to ensure that there's no glaring items, right, that are missing, or potentially sometimes there's a looming, design credit that wasn't quite done because of a modification or whatever it may be. There could be something that we want to make sure we close up before it's submitted. So that's a good thing to make sure that that's looked at before it's submitted. And then another item I want to make sure we understand is we don't have to wait until beneficial occupancies until that substantial completion time, right, to submit for the third party. When it's substantially complete, all of the documents really should be there. There's the red zone activities and the cleanup and pieces that are happening, but we can submit during that time. So it doesn't have to be fully complete and then submit, and we're waiting another phase there. Before we dive back into our other pieces, also wanted to plug the record card documentation. That is another documentation piece that needs to be considered and make sure that we're complying with. And it kind of falls into also the closeout part here when we're looking at the DD 1354. So here, the goal and what we expect to see, right, is the code 1, that guidance has been met. The UFC has been met. There's a lot of ways that we can identify and clarify that in both the e-notebook and in the DAs, the design of how that's met and to what extent. And so we're looking for that code 1. But we also want to note that we're not really looking, though, for code 3 to be listed when we're just waiting on third-party certification. And so because it becomes kind of an issue with real property records, right? So what happens then after we get our third-party certification? So headquarters is just wanting to make sure that we're looking for that code 1 and defining that as best as we can there. And so diving back into that timing, you know, when I'm talking about that final closeout in that red zone, really I just want this visual to be here so that we kind of see in that demonstration of that minimum amount of time. I kind of think of this as more of like, okay, this could be this short, but, you know, what's presented here with the time, and this is for lead GBCI's review, really that's approximately 2 months or so or more of review, but we know from experience that it takes longer to get everybody organized, to get ready to submit, to get the PDT ready, to get the contractors' responses ready, et cetera. And so when we're thinking of how long is it going to take to close out this project, we really need to consider that third-party element or even that validation of the UFC getting reviewed to ensure that we really can then mark that code 1, right, in that process.
So, Nicole, you know, that diagram it doesn't attach a number of days to the USACE responding to comments at either phase, but like ultimately that's a day-for-day add to whatever the quickest you can do that process. And it's never 1 day to turn around responses to those comments. So, and it could vary, I think you said this, but it varies widely depending on what sort of third-party certification tool you use.
Yes, that's a good point. I meant to say too, yes, that this is just one example, but this doesn't even include, you know, if you are doing that guiding principle validation with GBI, you know, they have a site visit. And so that's not even included here, right? There's prep for that site visit, the site visit actually happening, the review of the report, then following that and so forth. And you're absolutely right, Andy. You know, that's really that point is getting those responses. There's no dates here, right? That is up to the team. That is up to the sustainability and the tech lead and the PM to be organized and to respond, or to that contractor, right? In this instance, we're looking at, and we have a question here about this, we're looking at just one phase of that. So for leads specifically, it can be split into a design and a construction phase. This is just a phase, so it could either be representing design and construction submitted at the same time, if that was so picked, or it could be this is just a design phase or the construction phase of review for this one in particular. And so for our topic today, we're focusing on construction and thinking if we're trying to close out this building and we're just starting after we feel like we're done, we're just starting this process, we at very minimum have 2 months still before we can even get an answer, right, in completing this. And so we may want to move that up and urge our contractors to be working towards that earlier.
Nicole, do you guys almost always do the initial design review? Omaha District definitely does.
Yes. Yeah, we are standard at setting it up with a split review with the goal to complete that and submit that around BCOES.
I know we've even told our design build contracts to have the AE conduct the design review, to write that into the contract so that if there's problems coming, you can see them much earlier rather than at construction complete.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so when we make a plug for that spec, right, it's very important to be looking at what those requirements are and putting in if there's something specific or we find there's something that lessons learned like that, Andy, right? We want to add those to our sustainability spec or our scope of work specs that identify that requirement to submit by a certain time, which we have also done in some of our projects or high-level projects. So really, I'll open it up. We've got 1 minute, but are there any other questions or thoughts that we want to close up with here?
Well, it's 2 o'clock. Nicole, thanks for running through all of this. I think we probably wrap things up here. Appreciate everybody's attendance, and I think we have a 2-week break before we're running through. Oops, I lost my. Are we doing design next?
No, I think I have one next week actually.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
What does that mean?
I'm trying to remember myself. Yeah, indoor air quality, I believe, is next week.
Okay. So join us again next week for indoor air quality, and then I think we have a 2-week break.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody.
All right, everyone, have a great day.